Hey, everybody. Sunday morning. What is today? March the 3rd, 2024. I'm Brady, aka the War Hamster. Joining me, someone my audience, regular watchers probably know, Gordon, known as the Ghost of Base Patrick Henry. How you doing today, Gordon?
Doing well, man. How are you, Brady? Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure, and I'm glad you could jump on short notice. What we're doing today is I'm going to try to do something new, introduced to my channel. Just do kind of a sit reps on breaking news that the mainstream media may not be covering. And today there's some news coming out of the Ukraine theater in Europe that you're not going to see on Fox News or CNN. And I think it's important enough that I wanted to bring in somebody who's got quite a bit of knowledge about the background and what's going on in the geopolitical world. And that's my good friend, Gordon. So thanks for coming on.
Of course.
So this is going to be a little bit fun. I intentionally didn't tell Gordon the exact subject today. So I want to get his raw reactions and input and analysis. So this should be fun. It's we're trying to shooting for having this be about half hour, 40 minutes. We should be able to get a lot of information out in a short time. So let's do it. A little background information. There's apparently a conflict going on over in Ukraine. You might have heard something about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Oh,
2 years ago. Yeah, I think 2 years ago we talked about the real causes of it, the history, the Maiden Revolution, and I think it's anybody in our corner of the internet is pretty much aware that the CIA assisted in the overthrow of the duly elected president of Ukraine in 2014. You've had elements of Ukraine basically doing some form of ethnic cleansing in the eastern part of the country against their Russian co-Ukrainians, and that really was the trigger for Putin's invasion 2 years ago. Got anything you want to add on that?
yeah. No, I think that's pretty much on it. You did a good job. But you were the one who really turned me on to Kolomoisky. That had to have been 2 years ago. When you were like telling me to look into Kolomoisky and yeah, I mean that whole rabbit hole of how the Azov Battalion started and then Putin came out with Tucker recently. That was a big interview, and he said the same thing. He talked about how there was a color revolution in 2014 that the CIA backed. There's been a lot of tacit admission of that to various extents on the Western side. So yeah, I mean that's what this is all about. This is all about the CIA overthrowing a legally elected government in 2014. And John McCain and Lindsey Graham, I posted on X the other day, were there meeting with these guys like before, like as that was happening in 2014. So
yeah, those pictures they're pretty darn telling. And couldn't pick two nicer rhino Republicans to basically be the poster children for the ugly American foreign policy.
For real.
It's funny you brought up the Kolomoisky story. I just happened when I was getting ready for this, I found my notes from 2 years ago. I got a bunch of bullet points about that. You want me to read them off real quick?
Oh, please do.
All right. So we're looking at 2014. We got someone, Joe Biden gets the guy prosecuting Burisma fired. That's Victor Shokin. One of the major owners of Burisma was Ihor Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky also owned Privat Bank, where the vast majority of the IMF loans were being deposited, and these loans were getting laundered back to America. These were the loans that Biden threatened to pull the guarantee to when he said, you're not getting $1 billion. Those are the IMF loans. So this is a big deal.
Interesting. And what's also interesting is that then Biden, when he gets back into office after Trump, or maybe it might have been, no, it was before Trump. It was before Trump takes office. Biden says to, I think it was Zelensky, but he says, hey, man, you need to get these IMF loans that I guess were pending. Like you need to get funded for all this through the IMF so that Trump isn't giving you this money, because then he's going to start asking questions and you don't want him looking in. I just remember to some extent that was the guidance provided from Joe Biden to the Ukrainian leadership or whoever the counterpart was, whether it was Zelensky or somebody else. But yeah, he was saying, get the IMF to approve your loans, get the funding from the IMF, do not get the funding from Trump, because then he's going to ask questions.
Yeah, and they wanted to do it quickly, do it now, because it's going to take him a while to figure out the lay of the land. But he's smart, and he'll eventually figure out what's going on. So that's it. That little soundbite's pretty powerful. When I do my, there's something else I'm working on with the Ukraine timeline that I'm going to be playing that clip on it. I think I'll probably invite you to be the co-host on that presentation. That'll be ready in about a week or two.
Awesome.
Just jump back into Kolomoisky because it's fun. So Privat Bank, which he owns, gets nationalized in 2016 by the U.S. installed government of Poroshenko. And again, it seemed that 90% of the loans to the Privat Bank was making through the IMF, that were made to companies owned by Kolomoisky himself or his proxies. And that's like Zelensky. So Kolomoisky owns 11 or more television stations in Ukraine, including the one where Zelensky plays the role of a history teacher who becomes president to fight corruption. Kolomoisky decides to run Zelensky, funds his campaign, and uses TV monopoly to ensure he wins. Privat Bank is currently in court to return its ownership to the previous private owners. This is 2 years ago. Kolomoisky then launders all the money through Cyprus banks and ends up investing them in U.S. real estate. He pretty much owns half the skyline of Cleveland, Ohio, and about 40% of Louisville, Kentucky, which is pretty darn funny.
Interesting.
A guy, Kolomoisky, who's sanctioned in the United States for various reasons, can't even set foot here himself because of sanctions, yet he owns millions of dollars, maybe even billions of dollars worth of U.S. real estate. So shows you how.
Wow. Yeah.
That was a fascinating story then. It's changed a bit since. Kolomoisky was fell out of favor, but I don't want to go too deep down that hole because that's not what today's all about. But the Ukraine thing's a mess. It's been American meddling. The Europeans. The biggest thing they're trying to do is they're trying to avoid a hot war, or so they say. And you do that. We saw revelations over the last week that we know the CIA troops have been in there helping with the long-range missiles that Ukraine's been firing. And where it got really interesting is Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, was asked about deploying German missiles, and he came out and said, "We don't want to do that because we would have to have German soldiers actually doing the managing the controls of these long-range batteries." What he basically did is he threw France and England under the bus because they've been doing this the whole time, and that's not what they've been telling their people. So no, we're not using no boots on the ground in Ukraine. We're just giving them missiles. That crosses a pretty slippery line. When it comes to the Russia situation, if NATO troops are in Ukraine and it's not just our weaponry that's being fired at Russian citizens in Russian territory, who fired the first shot? That could be a predicate for an all-out war against NATO, and that's something I don't think anybody wants. So anyways, Putin probably has more than enough provocation for that. But Germany really did throw France and England under the bus. What I want to show you next is there's a recording came out on Russia Times. It was first reported. There's an article in Zero. Let me just go ahead and do screen share. Zero Hedge ran an article on this just this morning. I got the news last night from a different Substack, and but I'll run you through the Zero Hedge real quick, and then we'll jump into the video. You should be seeing that now. This morning, Zero Hedge. Germany confirms that the leaked audio of its top generals discussing blowing up the Crimean Bridge. In a huge development, absolute smoking gun revelation, the government of Germany has confirmed the authenticity of a leaked audio recording file published by Russia's state-backed Russia Times. The leak was first published by RT editor-in-chief Margarita Simonian, who described that she received it from Russian security officials. What they're basically talking about is, I'm going to play the recording for you, transcribed momentarily. But this article is worth reading. I'm going to put the link in the video when I post it on my channel, and it's very much worth reading. Just to give a quick summary of it, a German Defense Ministry spokeswoman confirmed that the ministry believes a conversation in the Air Force Division was "quote unquote" intercepted. So this brings up an interesting question before we jump in. This is the top brass of the German Air Force, and the Russians are able to intercept their phone calls.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, that's not touched on in the article, but that's some pretty darn good intelligence.
Yeah. I mean, the Russians probably have I would imagine, a pretty good intelligence apparatus, and I think a lot of people they make these conflating connections where they connect Putin to the KGB, and then they're like, oh well, the KGB is this really nefarious thing, and there's absolutely truth to that to an extent. But the KGB doesn't exist anymore. So KGB hasn't been around for 30 years. And I mean, obviously, like what they have now would be considered in a way its successor. But yeah, I mean, this is different than the KGB, but I'm sure just as capable, if not as formidable. Um,
It's the FSB now. Is that right? Do I have the acronym?
yep, I think that's right. That sounds right. I think that's correct. Yep. And by the way, Putin has been like ever since he came into power, he's been going after his KGB colleagues. The oligarchs, Kolomoisky would be one of them.
Yeah, well, Kolomoisky and Putin hate each other's guts. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
Kolomoisky's never allowed to set foot in Russia again, nor would he dare. Uh, now, he's not all that popular in Ukraine, depending on whose version of the story you believe. But he's a power player, yeah, and he's got a lot of influence in some of the stuff going on in Israel as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and an interesting thing to point out, and I know you and the Colonel have been Colonel Towner Watkins have been doing shows on this, but Gladio, I mean Operation Gladio, which Matt and I had covered on Breaking History this past week, certainly is at play here. I would think in the Russia Ukraine, and then this story about Germany blowing up the Crimea Bridge. I mean that's all connected to the spirit of Operation Gladio, if it's not still an ongoing op, which it very likely probably is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, one of the things I like to point out is that the CIA's biggest base anywhere outside the United States happens to sit there right off the border of Ukraine in Poland.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, we've got a massive CIA presence right there in Poland, have for a long time.
And would that be on the Polish side or the Ukrainian side?
On the Polish side, because
Yeah,
you wouldn't.
yeah,
But
that makes sense. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go back and I guess I got to go watch your show with Matt on Gladio. I'm sure you guys did a pretty good job on that.
Yeah, we talked about you and Tanner Watkins, and I talked about some of the things that y'all discussed, and I linked y'all's show because y'all that the most recent one y'all did. There's some really good stuff in there that we talked about.
I was wondering where that extra bump in the views came from, so thank you for that. Yeah, every time I do a show with you or Matt, my viewership goes up quite a bit. So I appreciate
Good.
it. I know you guys are doing good work over there. There's about, I don't know, we only have so many hours in the day. There's maybe 5 or 6 shows that I watch on a regular basis, and you guys make that list. So congrats for putting out really
Awesome.
good content.
I'm honored to be on that list.
I appreciate that. The one show I never miss ever is Dan Bongino, and you know that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another one I like quite a bit is Brian McClanahan. He does some great stuff on the Constitution. He's an original intent guy like me, and
Nice.
I'll be giving him a hat tip because I'm borrowing some of his work later today on the show I'm doing next. But anyway, jumping back into Ukraine, thing I wanted to point out is this is not they've already bombed that bridge to Crimea has already been bombed once, or actually twice because they set off the truck bomb, and it's a big sturdy bridge. So now they're talking about I'll just jump into the video here in a second and let them tell you in their own words. Anyways, the topics include aiming missiles at targets such as a key bridge over Kerch Strait that links the Russian mainland to Crimea. They additionally talked about Taurus long-range air-to-surface missiles. It's a major focus of the conversation. And they also talk about the Franco-British cruise missile Storm Shadow. The thing to remember is these Ukrainian soldiers aren't trained to use these weapons. So it has to have a NATO somebody out there. I mean, it could be as simple as, we do the targeting using the satellite. We pick the targets, we program it, and they grab a Ukrainian and say, push fire. We didn't fire it. I mean, that's about how I think that goes down.
Yeah. Interesting.
This stuff really matters when you start to consider that the United States is still planning on sending over a bunch of, is it F-16s or F-35s later this year into Ukraine.
Yeah, I definitely saw the F-16 story, but yeah, it could be both.
I don't know. I don't even know which it is either or. But what's interesting about that is who's going to fly those planes.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not like you can just grab a Ukrainian and be like, "Hey, you've flown like a plane before. You're a pilot. Like, jump in this F-16 and take it into combat. Like, let alone fly the plane. But then you got to fly it under combat conditions and not get killed."
And I'm imagining the controls are all in English. We haven't been able to change it to what do they use Cyrillic over there in Ukraine?
Yeah, I think that's right. Cyrillic. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah. So figure if the planes get there like in late summer, assuming the conflict isn't ended by then, you're looking at least several months of training at the very minimal.
Yeah. If not just NATO pilots flying them, right?
Yeah. In the meantime, they're on the ground in Ukraine, which makes them a hard target. Very easy target, I should say. And Russia's shown the ability to send their hypersonic missiles to pretty precise locations to hit key infrastructure targets. So I can't think of anything possibly going wrong with this plan.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. Well, let me do this. Let me jump into the video because it's about 5 minutes long. I wish I could slow this down. Oh, let me give a hat tip here. This is from a Substack from a guy named Simplicius the Thinker. And he's done some of the, what he does is he grabs European and foreign newspapers and translates them and does the breakdown. He's one of the better analysts of stuff going on outside the United States if you don't want Western mainstream journalistic opinions. So highly recommend subscribe to Simplicius is a Substack. I've been reading him, I don't know, almost since he came out, and makes me a little bit smarter every morning. So he's one of, you get up in the morning, you scroll through your 150 emails, you save about 5 that are worth reading.
Yeah.
This is one of my 5 always worth reading.
Okay. Well, that's a good endorsement. I'll have to check him out.
Also on that list is I never, ever miss reading the Badlands Media email. So give you
the morning brief is, it's always good.
Yeah, that's some pretty good stuff. Okay, so there's several of these videos captured. They're all transcribed. It goes pretty fast. And I can't slow this thing. I tried to slow this thing down. If I do it at 50% play speed, it's too slow. So I'm doing it at regular speed. It's going to go quick and stop me anytime you want if you want to break anything down.
Okay.
I should have the volume shared, but stop me if I don't. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to stop the share and make sure I have it. Oh, this isn't Zoom. I don't have to do that, do I?
Yeah. You're right. You don't have to do that. I think it should. The tab should automatically share if you're doing it for the tab. If it's the window or the full screen, I think you have to click the box.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to give this thing a play, and come on. That was the cue to play.
Die uns intensiv angeguckt haben. Und die Brücke ist leider aufgrund ihrer Größe wie ein Flugplatz. Das heißt, es kann durchaus sein, dass ich dafür 10 oder 20 Flugkörper brauche.
Ja, 12 geschätzt, wenn es da, wo sie aufklappt, wenn du die Pfeiler nimmst.
Ja, und selbst der Pfeiler, da machen wir unter Umständen nur ein Loch rein. Und dann stehen wir da. Ja. Also, ich sag mal, um da eine valide Aussage zu haben, müssten wir es wirklich selber mal.
Ich wollte auch nicht die Brücke wegbringen. Ich will nur sagen, das ist quasi der pragmatische Ansatz. Was wollen die überhaupt damit?
Aber
ich kriege das hin und wie schnell könnte ich die dafür ausbilden? Und am Ende, was bleibt, ist, dass wir denen die image-zentralisierten Missionsplanungsdaten geben müssen. Wir müssen denen grundsätzlich die SEMOVI geben, wenn sie nicht selber haben. Und die Target-Daten, die haben wir ja, aber das müsste man denen auch irgendwie zur Verfügung stellen. Weil wenn es um so kleine Ziele geht, dann muss der halt ein bisschen genauer ausgeplant werden als nur auf dem Sat-Picture. Wenn es auf gehärtete Ziele geht, dann ist das fairly easy und relativ schnell geplant. Wenn man vor allem sagt, exploiten, dass der in zweistelliger Fußhöhe fliegen kann.
So let's break that down real quick. Any thoughts?
Yeah. So basically, I mean, what I'm gathering is, and they're speaking quickly, but what I'm gathering is like what you just said, is that they're saying based on the nature of the mission and what they're trying to accomplish and targeting this bridge, they have to provide like very, very precise data. They can't just be like, here's a picture, like a satellite picture of what we want you to hit, go hit it. They have to actually like provide like, I guess, coordinates or something to help the targeting system, where they don't trust the Ukrainians to be competent enough to do that with this specific weapon system.
Yeah, exactly. And the implication is we're going to have German troops actually operating, these systems.
Mm-hmm.
Ich meine, das bringt es ja schon ganz gut auf den Punkt. Wir alle wissen ja, dass sie die Brücke rausnehmen wollen. Das ist klar, wissen wir auch, was das am Ende bedeutet. Dann ist die Versorgung dieser so wichtig, nicht nur militärisch strategisch wichtig, auch so ein bisschen politisch ist die gute Insel da ja ihr Herzstück. Jetzt nicht mehr ganz so fatal, wo sie ja quasi ihre Landbrücke mehr oder weniger dahin haben. Aber und da hat man eben Angst, wenn da die direkte Link der Streitkräfte in die Ukraine geht. Und da wäre halt dann immer die Frage, kann man im Grunde genommen den Trick pullen, dass man unsere Leute abstellt zur MBDA, dass nur eine Direct Line zwischen MBDA und der Ukraine ist. Dann ist es weniger schlimm, wie wenn die Direct Line unserer Luftwaffe zu ihnen ist. Ja.
Ich glaube, das macht keinen Unterschied, Ingo. Also wir müssen halt aufpassen, dass wir nicht gleich zu Beginn ein Zielkriterium formulieren. Und ich meine, wenn wir dem Minister jetzt sagen, ich überspitze mal ein bisschen, wir planen die Daten und fahren die dann von Polen aus vom Auto rüber, damit keiner mitkriegt. Das ist ein Killkriterium. Also wir werden es nicht schaffen, dass wir mit einer irgendwie gearteten Beteiligung von uns das Ganze.
So now they're talking about, they got to make sure that it does not appear that they had their hand in it. Although, yeah, I would think that the Russians are going to be able to identify whoever hits their bridge just from the short, just from the wreckage. They're pretty good at that stuff, forensic evidence.
Yeah, that was an interesting kind of back and forth because it sounds like one of the guys was saying, well, we got to like take steps and make sure that, we insulate ourselves from this so we can't be directly implicated. And it sounds like the other guy was like, yeah, I don't think it really matters. Like, we just need to make sure that this is done right. And I don't know. It seems like one of them is concerned with optics and the other one's kind of like less concerned with optics. That was my takeaway, but I might be wrong. Perhaps it's a difference of opinion on how the optics are handled.
No, that actually makes sense, and it kind of ties into one of the things that's also going on over there in the political situation in Germany. We really should talk about that because just like in a lot of European and American countries, the populist leaders are starting to really get some momentum. We saw that in the Netherlands recent elections. This is happening, and it's the conservatives over there would be very close to our neoliberals, and they've got they're NATO has got quite a bit of influence on the politics throughout Europe. It always has.
Mm-hmm.
So that has a lot to do and play here because you're going to find the populists, the people, really don't want war with Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in Germany. I mean, you talk about America, like not wanting war with Ukraine or Russia. But the Germany's right there. And plus they happen to get a lot of their energy comes from Russia or did come from Russia. I don't know what the exact circumstances are now that that other pipeline got blown up. Although I don't think Nord Stream 2 was actually operating when it got blown up. I don't remember. But anyway, do we know? Are these guys German military or are they NATO?
This is German Air Force.
German Air Force. Okay.
Yeah.
Es macht, also erstmal wenn das von der Firma kommt, müsst ihr erstmal die MBDA dem Ganzen zustimmen, ob die das machen wollen. Ja, dann machen die auch. Ja, aber dann macht es auch keinen Unterschied.
Real quick question.
Das planen lassen.
They said NBDA and they also said MBDA. What are those two things?
I believe it's the manufacturer. That was
okay.
What I was able to gather.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And the other question was, they talked about blowing up a bridge, but then the land bridge still being active. So I assume that it has to do with how I didn't want to pull up a map right now while I was listening to that, but like how Russia connects to Crimea, maybe.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna kick myself. Because you're so good with maps. I was gonna ask you to bring a map to this conversation. If you've got a really good map of the region and include how Odessa connects to Moldova, if you can take a look at that, because we probably ought to close the conversation with that. But if you have that in your little arsenal of maps, that would be cool to have handy when we get to that.
Which bridge is this that got blown up? I forget the name.
Well, it didn't get blown up. It's they just said it, but I'm terrible with the foreign names. It's the one the land bridge that connects. It's like an 11-mile bridge that connects Crimea to Russia.
Okay.
The Ukrainians would love to take it out, but this thing's like as big as a football field. I mean, it's wide. It's like 8 lanes on each side. They hit it before with a missile. They only closed down 2 lanes, and it's back open now. They hit it before with a truck bomb. Didn't do all that much damage. This thing's built like a tank.
This is the one that's in Kirsch because I heard him say Kirsch.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I got it. So yeah, let's keep playing it, and then we'll look at the map afterwards.
I'm going to go down to a couple other recordings. I don't think this one's going to give us any more juice.
Okay.
But the next ones do. These are shorter. You can see the title. The French don't do that.
Ich weiß, wie es die Engländer machen. Die machen es ja komplett im Reachback. Die haben auch ein paar Leute vor Ort. Das machen sie, die Franzosen nicht. Also sie QCen auch die Ukrainer beim Beladen des Scalp, weil sie sagen, Storm Shadow und Scalp ist aus der rein technischen Perspektive relativ ähnlich. Da haben sie mir schon gesagt, ja, Herrgott, sie würden auch den Ukrainer beim Taurus-Loading über die Schulter gucken. Die Frage wäre aber, wie lösen wir das dann? Lassen wir die Missionsplanung machen und geben ihnen Reachback-mäßig die MBDA an die Hand, und bringen halt einen unserer Leute dann zur MBDA.
Wir können die Zeit auch nicht verkürzen, wenn es nachher einen Falscheinsatz gibt und das Ding auf den Kindergarten aufhält und es zivile Opfer gibt.
Interesting. Okay, so they just clarified that the MBDA is the company. It sounds like that's loading the missile. I don't know if it's the manufacturer, but it says right there in the video, MBDA is the company holding the missile.
Yeah, I just looked this up for you while we were watching that.
Or I'm sorry, it says building the. I'm sorry, just the resolution is bad. The building the Taurus missile. So they're the company building the Taurus missile, and then they were saying how they had to, like, the British, like, were very, very diligent in watching them as they were loading the Taurus missile, and like the Ukrainians, mainly the Ukrainians, and so it sounds like NATO don't really trust these Ukrainians to be professional, competent, able to use these systems by themselves. And then they were just talking about how the French and the British are way more careful about how they intermingle and how they don't get plausible deniability. They maintain that, it sounds like, is what they're referencing.
Yep, I got the exact same takeaway. I just looked it up, and I should have done this beforehand. MBDA is a European multinational developer and manufacturer of missiles. It was created in 2001 after the merger of the main French, British, and Italian missile systems companies merged. So that's who MBDA is. Basically a military-industrial complex.
I see. Yep. I see. Okay. Hey, real quick, let me share my screen, and I'll talk about these bridges real quick to help people understand.
Yep, go for it.
Okay, so let's do. Okay, so you can see the Google Maps.
Not yet.
Oh wait, yeah, wait.
I've got to add it to stage. Oops, let me stop that.
Okay. All right. So here's the Black Sea. Here's Ukraine, Russia. This is Crimea. All right. So this is the thing that's been they've been fighting about since 2014. That's when Russia invaded Crimea. So here's the Kerch Bridge. This is the bridge we're talking about hitting, right? The land bridge that they're talking about is actually this area right here. So let me show you this Wall Street Journal article. They have this map that shows that. So here's Crimea again. They don't really do a good job of distinguishing between land and ocean, land and sea here, but you can see the Sea of Azov, the Black Sea. And so this red right here, this is the land bridge linking the Donbass to Crimea. And so that land bridge is, they're saying, if we take out the Kerch Bridge, they still have the land bridge. So it won't be a total catastrophe. They're saying, I guess they're trying to, they were wargaming kind of what the implications would be and how the Russians would react. And they're saying that it's not like we're cutting them off completely from Crimea by blowing up this bridge. We're just sending a message, and whatever it is they're trying to achieve with the optics of it, taking out the bridge.
In that area where the land bridge is, where all the fighting is going on, or an awful lot of it is happening.
Exactly. Yeah. Mariupol and obviously like Donetsk, it's those have been in the news all the time. So.
And you'll hear them talking about Odessa. Now, Odessa is kind of my understanding is it's about 50%, 50-50 Ukrainian versus Russian language or heritage. And if you can pull up Moldova, which is just to the west of Odessa, that's where I think it's going to get very interesting. Moldova has an awful lot of ethnic Russians. Yeah. So there's a lot of turmoil going on between in the Moldova region right now, and you're going to hear about this more and more in the news. But if you draw the line from your land bridge through Odessa to Moldova, you would have a one united Russian corridor going through there, and it would effectively make Ukraine cut off Ukraine's access to the Black Sea altogether, make them a landlocked, backwards third world, Ukrainian backwater.
If you're saying if Moldova took Odessa?
Well, if the Russians swept through, either through, as they're making a lot of gains lately, and they were able to connect through Odessa to Moldova, you'd have one contiguous Russian border going all the way through.
Yes, that's a very good point. Putin actually mentioned that to Tucker, and this is something that I was talking about this 2 years ago when you and I would and others would do these Zoom calls. Where Catherine the Great, who was the Russian monarch during the era of the American Revolution, very friendly to the founding fathers, Ben Franklin, John Paul Jones. She actually is the one who established all of these cities down here. So all these cities, Odessa, Mariupol, Sevastopol, like Crimea, all this stuff, Kherson, these were all established by the Russians under Catherine the Great, and this just kind of feeds into Putin's narrative, which is accurate, that these are all ethnic Russians. All these people who live here are ethnic Russians. Ukraine, he's the one who actually taught me. I didn't realize that Ukrainian means like borderland. So when you call somebody Ukrainian, you're basically just saying they're from the borderlands, which makes sense because historically, throughout like historic documents, people are referred to as Ukrainians, even when the nation of Ukraine didn't like exist at the time. And so that makes sense. I always wondered, like, why did they call them Ukrainian if at the time there wasn't really like a Ukrainian nation? And that's what Putin was saying, is when you say Ukrainian, you just mean they come from these borderlands that are kind of between, you know, Poland, Romania, Russia. They're kind of nebulous or have been nebulous over the centuries.
And it's interesting. I got that from, I'm trying to figure out which source I got this next little tidbit from. I'm not going to remember it, but apparently, you know, you've got the fascists in Ukraine. They absolutely exist. Azov battalion types. They actually, my understanding is they consider Russians to be a inferior race, and they don't consider them part of the Caucasian race. Which, if you know Russian people, you take a look at them, they, you know, blonde hair, blue eyed, would seem to, you know, go against that. But apparently, there is quite a bit of animosity that goes back generations.
Yes, my understanding, and I'm actually starting to dig into this now. There's a book that I've ordered where somebody actually wrote about this specific subject. My understanding is that those ethnic Ukrainians, quote unquote, who would consider Russians like almost like their arch rival or their enemy, those people are Turkic Khazarians. So they're like Turkic, like Khazars, which would mean they come from this region right here. And what the Khazars are really famous for is preventing the caliphate, the Muslim caliphate, from moving north past the Caucasus Mountains into, you know, like the Russian territory. So they basically stopped the caliphate like right here, you know, 1,500 years, 1,400 years ago.
Didn't Matt Eretz say he was going to do a real big show on who the Khazarians really were?
We are going to do a show on the Khazarians. Yeah, that'll be an interesting show because I don't know. Like, we haven't talked about it in depth. We talked about it a little bit off air, but like I don't know if we're going to be in total agreement on the Khazarians. Although I do think that Matt brings a lot of interesting points about the Khazarians to the table. So
yeah,
if and when we do that, I think we will. It'll be an interesting show. It'll be a different kind of show for breaking history.
Yeah, I will very much be watching that live. Matt's got a different take with the part what's interesting, the guy who invented the coin Khazarian Mafia is a gentleman that I've, you know, had on with Ron Partain. We've interviewed him a couple of times, and that's Mike.
Not Davis, but Mike Smith.
It is one of those names like that. I'll pull it up here momentarily. I've got it on my channel somewhere. I want to give the guy credit, so don't want to quote his work with it. Mike Harris. I'm sorry. Yep, I should remember that. Anyway, so he paints the picture you'll find painted in most of the internet that we find talks about the Khazarian Mafia. Some people have some outlandish conspiracy theories about the Khazarians ruling the world. I think Matt's probably got a more realistic take, and a lot of that's because he really breaks down what was going on in that period of time. It was 840 AD with Harun al-Rashid, who was a sultan, and of course there was Charlemagne. Was going on at the time, and the whole Silk Road trade up. But I'm not going to. That's Matt's bailiwick. I'll let him break that one on us.
Yep.
All right, you want to do one or two more of those short videos?
Yeah, let's just do one or two more, and then just because once this baby wakes up, I'm gonna have to bounce. So I don't want to be rude and dip suddenly.
Nah, not at all. If I hear any crying, we'll sign off the air quickly. Okay, that was the first one. This is the second one. I'll go to the third one.
Dass uns klar sein muss, das wird nicht den Krieg ändern. Dafür haben wir gar nicht, wir wollen ja auch nicht alle abgeben und nicht alle sind bei uns auch gleich, muss ich euch nicht sagen. Also, ne, man könnte sagen 50 in der ersten Tranche und wenn sie uns dann nochmal würgen würden für die nächsten 50 und dann wäre aber auch Ende Gelände. So, das ist völlig klar. Nur das ist ja jetzt wieder große Politik.
So I found that little clip fascinating.
I was trying to follow what they were saying, but I kind of got lost for a minute there. What was the gist of what they just said?
The Taurus missile is the one they're talking about, and it sounds. First thing that the implication there is the Germans have very limited supply, and that we've heard the U.S. military complaining about how they can't restock their stockpiles. They've been giving away all their good stuff over to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention everything we gave away in Afghanistan, and the military-industrial complex loves that. You got to refill your orders, okay? That's just money hand over fist. And of course, the military-industrial complex, manages. They've got 2,000 lobbyists in D.C. And we know why we know why that cartel exists, and the war machine.
Yep. And that brings up a good point. Like people because I've seen people like in the Badlands chat get worked up about this, about like there's this perception, I think, that the military industrial complex, meaning the like Raytheons of the world, the American based or American founded like defense contractors are only selling to America and like NATO countries, which I think is wrong. Like that's not how it works. I think they are selling to they're selling to others as well, and also then their equipment is being sold secondhand to places that maybe wouldn't be allowed, like by the Pentagon, to be sold to directly by Raytheon or what have you, because the Pentagon does have, I think has to approve all their deals. But yeah, I mean, and then Putin makes like some really good points during his Oliver Stone interviews and even his Tucker interview about developing the anti-ballistic systems like 20 years ago, and how Bush did not want to work with them. And he said he had to go talk to Bush's dad about that and get permission from him, and he wouldn't give it. And so, which is interesting because he was obviously still running the show at that point. But that now, and then Putin says that now Russia is more advanced. Like Russia has better ballistic technology than America does. I don't know if that's true or not, but you look at like what Iran has. Iran has like very, very sophisticated developed missile systems. And I mean, even like the Mockingbird media will say that Iran has a very robust arsenal. And a lot of that has to do with the fact they just haven't had to use their arsenal the way like the United States has been using theirs, because we give our stuff to places like Ukraine to fight proxy wars. So it's like Iran has a built-up arsenal. Russia has a built-up arsenal. I'm sure China has a built-up arsenal. And so it's, it presents very interesting power dynamics when you're talking about World War III, which is what these people were trying to start.
Yeah, honestly, and that's really you jump to the punchline is how, what this is all about. This is pushing the envelope on World War III.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why one of the interesting things about that last clip is they talked about the political impact. We'll give you 50 of these Taurus missiles, make a political impact. And ostensibly, that's to show that the Ukrainians are still fighting back so they can get more U.S. funding, I would imagine. And they said, and if they do something successful politically, we'll give them another 50 missiles, but that's it. That's all we can afford. Otherwise we're going to be, we'll have uncovered our own backside. So that was a 30-second clip, but a lot was said there in a short amount of time. Let's just do this one more.
Man muss immer davon ausgehen, was die Ukrainer da mittlerweile sonst alles machen. Wir wissen ja auch, dass da viele Leute mit amerikanischen Akzenten.
Boom, that was it right there. Did you read that part?
Yeah, we know that many people with American accents and civil are running around there. So that's like CIA agents, talking about State Department employees, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can't let that pass without saying the State Department has almost always been the diplomatic wing of the CIA. And that's evidenced by, who was the Secretary of State at the time the CIA was founded? John
Dulles, right? Yeah.
John Foster Dulles is running the State Department. His brother, Alan Dulles, is running the CIA. And of course, what were Mike Pompeo's two roles under the Trump administration? Secretary of State and CIA director.
That's right. That's right. Yep. And Mike Benz, and I mentioned him because he's obviously been talking a lot about like the censorship industrial complex and the intelligence community's role in that and everything. And he's been going very viral and he's kind of everywhere. He mentioned in a very recent video he did the same thing that you and I have been saying for 2 years, which is this. He says he takes it a step further. He says the State Department, the CIA, and the Pentagon. He said think of all three of those as completely synonymous. He's like, if you hear about one in a story, just imagine being able to swap in the CIA, swap in the State Department. They use different. They'll say the Pentagon in one context. They'll say the CIA in another context. Most of the time, they'll say the State Department because that the perception is that that's a more like diplomatic agents, like organization, and that's more about like diplomacy and peacemaking. But yeah, it's interesting that even he says it's the CIA, the State Department, and the Pentagon are all this exact same thing.
Yeah, and great example of that is that famous recording with Victoria Nuland in 2014, prior to the Maiden Revolution. She's working for the State Department at the time, and while she's plotting what became a CIA coup. So yeah, it was self-evident. Another really good video I watched just recently, someone on Twitter recommended I watch it, was Eric Prince appeared on the PBD broadcast. And I'll put that link in the show notes as well. Eric Prince really knows the military-industrial complex, and he breaks it down really nicely about all the conflicts of interest. They do not have the defense of America at heart. And, that was an eye-opening, not eye-opening, but it really was accentuating the points that we've already made about what the military-industrial complex is. So I do recommend that's another good video to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always nice when these guys who, have clout and when they put stuff out, it's going to reach a lot of eyeballs and ears. It's always nice when they're saying stuff that we've been talking about for a long time. Not that we need their affirmation in order for it to be true. It's just that now that just means it's going to reach more people and more people are going to be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just finish this one up. We got about another 20 seconds, and then we can give a summary of what we're talking about here today.
Die Klamotten rumlaufen.
Ja.
Dass man sagt, dazu sind sie dann noch relativ schnell selbst in der Lage, weil die Satellitenaufnahmen, die haben sie alle.
Play that again. Play that last part again. I missed the last two things I said. So it says people with American accents. Right.
Dass man sagt, dazu sind sie dann noch relativ schnell selbst in der Lage, weil die Satellitenaufnahmen, die haben sie alle.
It almost seems like they got cut off like half sentence or something, like midway through. But sounds like they were implying that the Americans running around with American accents are the ones who are going to be doing it quickly. And I assume he's talking about some of the Taurus missiles.
I would imagine something along those lines. They were going to segue into talking about the satellite photos. Down below, there's a full 34-minute version of that video that Simplicius provided us with. Thank you, sir. Here's, in a nutshell, high-level view. We're inching closer and closer to NATO direct involvement in the conflict, and the conflict's almost over. Russia's been won the victories they've won. They've been, Ukraine's throwing people into the meat grinder that are, their average age of soldiers in their 40s now. Nobody new is volunteering. They're having to conscript people off the streets with no training, being thrown on the front lines. You start reading some of these, there's some videos came out after the last few weeks of confessions of Ukrainian soldiers talking about this. If the translations are accurate, the morale is just shot. I don't think Russia ever had any intention of taking over all of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I think we take Putin at his word that he was going to basically annex the Russian-speaking parts of the nation. Interesting part about that is the vast majority of the rich farmlands and the mining and the corporate are in the the eastern part that Russia's taking over. The part of Ukraine that would be left behind really is a bad third world backwater. That's not where they're going to be. They would end up being a very poor country.
Yeah, well, and I'm pretty sure didn't Putin explain? It was either to Tucker, I think it was to Tucker, that there was a vote held in Ukraine for those areas to be annexed by Russia, and they voted to do that. I think that people voted to leave Ukraine and for those regions to join Russia because they considered themselves Russian, and that's really what I think in a big way kicked off the color revolution. And say, all right, we can't allow this to happen.
Yeah, it needs to be said that Ukraine has passed laws you can't speak Russian in public. You have to made it the official language. I mean, they really have created an apartheid system.
I was on with Kavork, who's a Syrian based podcaster, and he had a guy on who I think was British, but he lives in Russia and maybe is a Russian citizen. I don't know. But he was saying, this other guy was saying, explaining how historically this region, like the Donbass, like that whole region, southeastern Ukraine, was a huge steel center for during the Soviet era. And so he's saying there's a huge industrial component to this and obviously you have the submarine bases in Crimea. I mean, Crimea is a very major strategic military point as well. But it was just interesting that he pointed that out, which I knew about, the breadbasket of Europe, like Ukraine being important from a food standpoint, agriculture standpoint, but to hear about the steel, like that was also very interesting. And it makes sense because it's on the coast of the Black Sea, and the Black Sea is a historic, there's a lot of history around the Black Sea. So yeah, I mean, well, like you said, this feels like Gladio. This feels like an extension of Gladio. You know, as Matt and I kind of discerned during the show, is, you know, talking about Hausinger. Hausinger was high up in the Third Reich, and then went on to become the first NATO chair of the military. And basically, how NATO is basically the Fourth Reich. NATO is you know, the Third Reich reimagined. Like we talked about the CIA kind of being an extension of, you know, with so many Nazis coming over and joining the CIA and working with the CIA. But it seems like NATO really is almost like the recreation of what the fascists were trying to accomplish. And then you see how hostile they are towards Russia and how eager they are to start this continental war between continental Europe and Russia. It's just interesting that, you know, when you look at all those factors. And then, of course, we also talked about the Banderites. You know, the Azov Battalion guys are wearing Banderite patches. Stepan Bandera, we talked about him. He was somebody who was too extreme for the Nazis. The Nazis thought he was too extreme to deal with. He was like a Ukrainian resistance fighter who was fighting the Soviets. He was too extreme for the Nazis, but he wasn't too extreme for the CIA. The CIA recruited him to be part of Operation Gladio. And he has like a red and black flag, like a red band, black band flag. And the Azov Battalion guys all wear that patch, like the Bandera flag on their uniforms. So they are like Banderites.
Yeah, and there's statues of Stepan Bandera all over Western Ukraine. And one of the interesting parts is there's a region that's changed hands many times over the centuries, right between Poland and Ukraine. That used to be Polish. Bandera was fighting in that region. And there's a story about he basically wiped out an entire town in Poland by throwing the entire town population into a pit. The Polish people haven't forgotten. There's no love lost between the two. And I would not be surprised to see Poland end up regaining a little bit of territory when this is all said and done at the peace table. Because there is a lot of intermixing, you know, in those border towns and those regions. You have people that are ethnic Polish and ethnic Ukrainian. And they do have a lot of, shall we say, racial memory.
Well, and that's interesting because you look at, like, especially over the past century, like the Hohenzollern, like after World War II, this region of the world, Eastern Europe, has really had some really horrifying massacres occur, and just really, really inhumane things where populations have done really awful things to one another. The Holocaust gets a lot of attention, but there was things that were in a lot of ways just as bad, if not worse, occurring at even a larger scale at different points in history in this area. And then we learned about the Azov Battalion and what they were doing over the past, 8 years, 10 years in southeastern Ukraine, where they're like torturing people, videoing it, just for the sake of torturing people, just being awful, inhumane, terrible human beings, basically. And that's what Putin's talking about. Putin's talking about like the denazifying Ukraine. I think he's talking about these like sociopaths who are seem to take like pleasure in like human suffering, and I don't know where that comes from. I don't know if it's an ethnic thing. It's because they like hate the ethnic Russians or whatever it is. I'm sure we'll get more information on that, but it's just interesting when you think about how this region has suffered and how like there have been some really, really terrible atrocities that aren't really talked about by the mainstream because, ostensibly it's white people doing it to white people, and that's not going to really sell newspapers in their mind, at least.
Well, I think tribalism is part of the human condition. We've seen that since the oldest days of history. We see it all over the world. The tribalism, we see it across Africa right now.
For sure.
We see it in Asia. I mean,
the Middle East, the Middle East for sure. Yep.
And I think that's what the puppet masters, people who really rule the world, they like to do. They like to keep people, the different tribes, at each other's throats. It's the whole right versus left is a distraction to keep us from looking up.
That's true.
So there may be some of that going on as well. But what we are looking at is a very, very dire geopolitical situation. It's delicate, and we've got the wrong people in power, and we're doing the negotiations on the U.S. side or the NATO side, and it scares me. They've got every incentive to get us into a real hot war, especially with what you see going on in the polls with the 2024 election. If Ukraine, if all the truth ever comes out from Ukraine, there's some people in D.C. that are not going to see sunlight for quite some time. if the truth ever were to come out. And I'm thinking they'll do just about anything in their power to keep that from happening.
It's interesting how they're like fighting to the last man. Like they are not like they seemed like more willing to die, or at least more willing to sacrifice all their people before they're going to give up, because giving up, surrendering, maybe there are things that are going to be disclosed if they were to surrender that they are not willing to. They don't want that to ever see the light of day. I also was preparing for the Gladio show. I was researching in CIA Vault 7 the dynamic, or typing in Gladio there. Turkey and Syria comes up. It's just pages and pages and pages of Turkey and Syria and the Gladio operations in Turkey. A lot of that stuff was going through Cyprus, and that just made me think of Kolomoisky. That made me think of like the money laundering that happens out of Cyprus. And so I just can't help but wonder, Turkey being, a member of NATO since 1952, I believe, it just makes me think that there's something going on with Turkey. There's something going on with NATO. There's something going, maybe somehow that connects it to Israel, the Israel-Ukraine thing. There seems to be, at least the spirit of it, of what's happening. It feels like there's connection there. So
Yeah.
we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, Turkey's incredibly important, especially when you start talking about the Black Sea, because that's the other major naval power in the Black Sea is Turkey. Turkey basically guards the entrance to the Black Sea from Russia. If Russia has to play nice with Turkey, otherwise the Black Sea is shut down to them because of the land. But Turkey's got they've got a modern military and a very large armed forces there, not to be snickered at. They are a legitimate power in the region. They can't really project power outside their borders, but they can certainly protect those choke points. So the Turkish, and now we're going to go straight into your area of expertise. He's talking about what's going on in Israel, where the Saudi Arabians are trying to play. Saudi Arabia and Istanbul have a rivalry over who's going to be the leaders of the Sunni world, and that definitely impacts what's going on in Israel right now.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And it does all kind of feel connected. And I can't help but wonder if Turkey somehow connects these things. But and that's a great point with the choke point in Constantinople, Istanbul now. So.
Well, very good. Let's call this a wrap. You've given me an hour of your time almost. I certainly appreciate it. This is a lot of fun. I think we should do more of these SitReps impromptu anytime there's something breaking. And
absolutely.
I appreciate you jumping on. Any you want to tell everyone where to find you?
Yeah, you can find me at on X is the easiest way, at Ghost of BPH. And I'm on Badlands Media. I do Badlands Daily 10 a.m. on Mondays, and then Breaking History with Matt Arrett noon on Wednesdays, and those are Eastern Standard Time. Very good. And you can find me, well, if you're watching this video, you're probably seeing me on Rumble at war_hamster. You can get me on Twitter at war_hamster1776. And I'm on True Social a lot more now at war_hamster. And with that note, I will say goodbye. And thanks again, Gordon. I'd like to do it again. Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.